The sun bled over the horizon, spilling crimson and gold across the endless plains. Dust rose from the hoofbeats of a lone rider, a tall man in a weathered duster coat, his hat pulled low to shade a face carved by wind and time. His name was Caleb Morgan, and in every saloon between Abilene and Dodge, whispers called him many things: gunslinger, drifter, outlaw, or savior, depending on who was telling the tale. Caleb preferred none of it. He was just a man chasing silence, riding until the echoes of gunfire and screams from battles long past dulled enough that he could sleep a night through. But trouble, like a hungry coyote, always seemed to track him. That morning, his horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Whisper, carried him toward a river crossing near a small, half-forgotten settlement called Red Creek. He had no intention of staying longer than to water his horse and maybe trade for supplies. But fate has a habit of stepping in with muddy boots. The sound reached him first, a shrill cry, desperate, cutting through the plains wind. Caleb pulled up on Whisper's reins, his hand instinctively brushing the worn leather of his gun belt. Another cry followed, ragged, like someone fighting through a throat thick with pain. He urged Whisper forward, and within minutes he saw her. A woman. She was on her knees near the riverbank, clothes torn and face smudged with dirt and blood. 3 men loomed over her, cowhands by the look of them, but drunk and mean-eyed, the kind who took the law of the frontier to mean do as you please. One held her by the arm, jerking her upright while she clawed at him, screaming for release. Another laughed and tugged on her shawl, tearing it clean away. The third, the tallest, shoved her hard against a wagon wheel. Caleb's jaw tightened. He could ride on. He'd done it before. The West had taught him that stepping in usually meant bullets, blood, and burying someone before sundown. But something in the woman's cry hooked into his chest and wouldn't let go. He nudged Whisper forward until the trio noticed him. "Hell you want, stranger?" the tall one barked, hand dropping to his pistol. Caleb didn't answer right away. He dismounted slow, deliberate, boots crunching the gravel, his long coat shifting in the breeze. His eyes flicked once to the woman, dark hair falling wild around her face, her eyes wide with terror and fury, not fear alone. She was a fighter. "Let her go," Caleb said, voice low, steady as the river. The tall man spat. "Ain't your concern." "Now it is." The first gun cleared its holster before words could stretch any further. Caleb's own Colt barked a heartbeat later. Dust puffed from the tall man's shoulder as he spun and fell against the wagon, howling in pain. The other 2 froze, eyes flicking between Caleb's steady revolver and their groaning partner. "You want the same?" Caleb asked, tone even, not boasting, not begging. They muttered curses, then dragged their wounded friend up and stumbled back toward their horses. Within moments, they were dust on the horizon. Caleb holstered his Colt, exhaling through his teeth. The woman hadn't moved. She stared at him as though trying to measure whether he was rescuer or another brand of threat. "You all right, ma'am?" Caleb asked gently. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she staggered forward, clutching at his belt to steady herself. Her fingers dug into the leather, desperate, trembling. The contact jolted him like a bullet graze. "Careful now," he muttered, hands half raised, not daring to grip her shoulders. Her eyes burned into his, and for a breathless moment, the West fell silent, the river, the birds, even the wind. Just her and him. Then she whispered, raw and trembling, "Don't leave me. Not now." Caleb swallowed hard. He'd faced down gunfighters, gangs, even Apache war parties, but this, the press of her hand against his belt, the pleading in her voice, was more dangerous than all of it. "Woman," he rasped, his breath catching as he gently pried her fingers loose, "you'll lead me right into sin." Her name was Eliza Hart, he learned an hour later as he set her down near a campfire he built with practiced ease. She was younger than he first thought, maybe 23, but her eyes carried storms older than years. She told her story in fragments, her voice hoarse, her hands twisting in her lap. Her husband, Matthew Hart, had been a homesteader, a dreamer with 40 acres and a cabin not far from Red Creek. He was shot dead 2 weeks ago in a land dispute with a rancher who wanted his property. Since then, the rancher's hired men had been circling like vultures, waiting for her to give up the deed or worse. That morning, they'd found her hauling water from the river. She faltered, tears streaking through dirt on her cheeks. Caleb listened, jaw tight, fists curling around his coffee tin. He knew the story too well, the strong preying on the weak, law bent by money, widows left with nothing but grief. "You got family?" he asked softly. No, her gaze dropped to the fire. "It was just him and me. And now, just me." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the flames. Finally, Eliza raised her eyes, fixing him with a look both fragile and fierce. Why did you stop? Why risk yourself for me? Most men would have ridden on. Caleb looked into the fire, the flames painting his scarred face in flickers. Memories crowded him, faces of women and children he hadn't saved, bodies left behind because he chose survival. I guess I was tired of riding past, he murmured. That night, as coyotes howled across the plains, Eliza curled under his spare blanket, sleep pulling her under at last. Caleb sat awake by the fire, gun across his lap, eyes on the shadows. Every few minutes, he glanced at her, how she clutched the blanket, how the worry lines in her face eased in slumber. And each time, the same thought hit him like a hammer. This woman will be my undoing. The next morning brought more than sunlight. Word traveled fast in Red Creek. By the time Caleb led Eliza into town, eyes followed them from every porch and window. Whispers curled through the air like smoke. That's Hart's widow. Who's the stranger? At the general store, Caleb bought supplies, ignoring the sideways glances. Eliza moved close behind him, hand brushing his coat sleeve as though afraid he'd vanish if she let go. Then the saloon doors creaked open, and silence rippled across the street. The rancher himself stepped out, Clive Bannon, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine vest with a silver watch chain glinting in the sun. His mustache twitched as his eyes found Eliza. "Well, well," he drawled. "The widow Hart. I hear you found yourself a protector." His gaze slid to Caleb, sizing him up like a horse at auction. "Don't know who you are, stranger, but you're standing in the way of business." Caleb didn't speak. Bannon smirked. "I'll give you till sundown to ride on. The widow belongs to Red Creek, and Red Creek belongs to me." Eliza stiffened, clutching Caleb's arm now, not just his belt. Caleb's eyes narrowed, his voice flat as gunmetal. "We'll see come sundown." That night, as they sat again by a fire outside town, Eliza turned to him, voice trembling. "You'll get yourself killed for me." Caleb looked at her, the firelight glinting in her dark eyes. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I ain't about to let a man like Bannon take what ain't his." She swallowed hard, then did something that nearly undid him again. She reached for him, her hand sliding across his belt buckle, her fingers brushing leather before resting lightly against his hip. Caleb's breath caught, every nerve screaming. "Eliza!" His voice was ragged. She met his gaze, fierce and broken all at once. "Then don't you dare leave me. Not now. Not ever." The night deepened, the fire cracked, and Caleb knew without doubt, tomorrow would bring blood. And he also knew this, whatever came, he could no longer ride away from Eliza Hart. The sun sat heavy in the sky, a molten disk crawling toward the jagged line of the western hills. Red Creek held its breath. By sundown, the town would either belong wholly to Clive Bannon, or a drifter's colt might change the story forever. Caleb Morgan stood on the edge of the main street, hat brim low, duster swaying in the warm breeze. His mare, Whisper, was tied to a post nearby, restless, ears flicking at the tension in the air. Behind him, through the open window of the small boarding house, Eliza Hart watched with wide, unblinking eyes. She wanted to scream at him not to do it. She wanted to run into the street and grab his belt like she had at the riverbank, to hold him back from walking into certain death. But some part of her knew, this was not just his fight. This was the fight. For her land, for the right of every widow and orphan Bannon had ever cheated. And Caleb had chosen it. The saloon doors burst wide, and Bannon stepped out with the measured swagger of a man who had never been denied. A dozen of his ranch hands followed, rifles and pistols gleaming in the dying light. "Well, stranger," Bannon called, his voice carrying clear down the dust-packed street. "Here you stand. Red Creek watching. The widow peeking from her window. Tell me, are you a fool or just tired of living?" Caleb's gaze swept over the men, counting, weighing. 12. Maybe more inside. His odds were the same as they'd always been. Poor, but not impossible. He stepped forward, boots crunching, until only 20 paces separated him and Bannon. "I ain't the one who should be worried about living," Caleb said, his voice steady as stone. Laughter rippled through the ranch hands. Bannon smirked, stroking his mustache. "Bold words from a drifter. But let's see if you back them up." He nodded once. Guns flashed. The street erupted. Caleb's Colt was in his hand before the first rifle cracked. The man to Bannon's left dropped, clutching his chest. Caleb rolled, a bullet tearing a furrow in the dirt where he'd stood. He fired twice more, each shot deliberate, precise, and another 2 men fell screaming. But 12 guns against 1 was a storm no man could ride forever. A slug grazed Caleb's ribs, hot fire searing through his side. He gritted his teeth, dropped to a knee, and fired upward, his shot blowing the revolver clean from another man's hand. Chaos tore through Red Creek. Townsfolk who had gathered scattered for cover. Horses screamed. Smoke from black powder thickened the air. Through it all, Bannon stood back, watching, lips curled in cruel amusement. "You can't win, Morgan," he shouted over the gunfire. "You're just one man." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gun spoke for him. Inside the boarding house, Eliza's heart hammered. She pressed her hands against the window frame, torn between terror and something fiercer, something like pride. This drifter had no reason to risk his life for her. Yet there he was, bleeding, fighting, refusing to bend before Bannon's empire. Suddenly, she could stand it no longer. She grabbed Caleb's spare Winchester, the one propped against the wall, heavier than she expected, the wood stock slick with age. With shaking hands, she pushed through the door and stepped into the street. "Caleb!" she cried. He glanced her way for the briefest heartbeat, long enough to see the rifle in her grip, the fire in her eyes. "Eliza, stay back." But she didn't. Her first shot cracked wild, slamming into the post of the saloon. The second found truer aim, dropping a ranch hand who had been lining up Caleb from behind. The men cursed, ducking for cover. For the first time, doubt flickered across Bannon's face. Caleb fought like a man possessed. Side by side with Eliza, he drove them back, one by one, until the street was littered with groaning bodies, guns abandoned in the dust. Smoke hung heavy, the air stinking of blood and powder. At last, only Bannon remained, standing in the open, his revolver gleaming in the twilight. His smirk had faded. Sweat streaked his brow. But arrogance still burned in his eyes. "You think you've won," he spat. "You don't know who I am. I own this land, this town. Without me, Red Creek is nothing." Caleb's chest heaved, blood soaking his shirt. He lifted his Colt, steady despite the pain. "No, Bannon. Without you, Red Creek gets a chance to breathe." For a moment, silence ruled. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Then Bannon drew. So did Caleb. The guns barked as one. When the smoke cleared, Bannon lay flat on his back, eyes staring wide at the darkening sky, his revolver fallen from lifeless fingers. Caleb staggered, then dropped to one knee, clutching his side. "Caleb!" Eliza screamed, throwing the Winchester aside as she rushed to him. She slid into the dust, arms catching him before he could fall further. "Don't you dare leave me," she sobbed, tears streaking through the grime on her face. "Not now. Not after this." Caleb managed a grim smile, breath ragged. "Ain't planning to." Her arms wrapped tight around him, and in the heart of Red Creek, with the townsfolk emerging slowly from hiding, it was clear. One man had stood against tyranny, and a widow had refused to cower. Together, they had broken Bannon's hold. The days that followed blurred in a haze of healing and rebuilding. Caleb's wound, though deep, was not mortal. Eliza tended him with gentle hands, washing the blood, stitching where she could, her touch careful but determined. Each night, as he lay on a cot in her cabin, he felt her presence like a shield against the darkness. She kept the fire stoked, brewed bitter herbs for the pain, and sat by his side until sleep claimed him. Sometimes he woke in the small hours to find her asleep in the chair, her hand still clutching his belt as if afraid he'd vanish into the night. Each time, he whispered into the quiet, words she never heard, "Woman, you'll drive me right into sin, and I reckon I'll thank you for it." When at last he was strong enough to ride, the question hung heavy between them. Would he leave? It was what he did. Ride into a town, spill blood, then ride on before ghosts could chain him. But Eliza would not let him slip away so easily. One morning, she stood on the porch, the sunrise painting her hair in fire. Her hands were steady, her voice unshaken. "You saved my life, Caleb Morgan. You saved my land. But I won't let you give me half a heart. If you're going to leave, say it plain. If you're going to stay, then stay." Caleb sat astride Whisper, reins loose in his hands. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his voice was clear. I came here chasing silence. But all I found was your voice, Eliza Hart. And I ain't been able to ride past it." Her breath caught. He swung down, boots hitting the dust, and crossed the distance in 3 strides. His hand lifted, rough palm cupping her cheek. For a long suspended moment, the world held still, then his lips found hers, fierce and unyielding. When he pulled back, her eyes blazed. "Does this mean you'll stay?" she whispered. Caleb smiled, the first true smile in years. "Reckon a man's gotta lay down roots sometime. Might as well be with a woman who clutches his belt and steals his breath." Her laugh was shaky, bright with tears, and she pulled him into her arms again. It was about a man who finally stopped running, and a woman who refused to let go. And somewhere, under the endless sky of the Wild West, love bloomed in the dust, stubborn as sagebrush, unbreakable as the land itself.